Computer. Okay, hi everybody. It's Tuesday, July 5th. Welcome to our weekly SIG testing meeting. First up on the agenda, I wanted to pass off to Tim Hawken real quickly to talk about some updates related to CNCF and Go testing for projects.
So Eric Fitta asked me to join today real quick on this topic. The presupposition was that there were some questions about what was going on here. So let me give a quick overview of what I'm trying to achieve and where we are with it, and then people can ask if they have questions. So right now, all of the testing that we do automated, or a lot of the testing that we do, is run on Google Cloud and is paid for by Google sort of implicitly because it's just running in our google.com domain. All the projects were created by Googlers. This has presented a problem in a couple of regards. The biggest being people outside of Google are not really supposed to be added to those projects because they're in the google.com domain, which means they have access to things that they probably couldn't. As a smaller problem, right, it probably shouldn't be Google sort of quietly paying for this. It should actually be owned by CNCF or Linux Foundation or somebody who is more officially in charge of the project now. So I set out to make it possible for that to be the case so that we could invite more people to co-admin these testing resources. It's going to be interesting because it's going to require us to do some splitting of testing. Like for right now, we use GKE tests as part of the overall test suite to get a good signal, and it doesn't seem appropriate for CNCF to be paying for GKE tests, so we're going to have to split those bits of infrastructure out probably. So where we are with it, I've actually gone and we've created a Kubernetes.io Google domain, which means I can create a Google Cloud Platform organization object, which represents Kubernetes.io. This is good. It means now I can create projects that I can invite you all to. The next step will be figuring out how to move things over to that. I don't want to start yet, and here's why. When I actually got the numbers on what our testing costs, it turns out that it's pushing like $500,000 a year. And Linux Foundation is not quite equipped to pay for that yet. So we're working right now to figure out exactly how that's going to be covered. I expect that Google will probably just foot a lot of that as we are today. It's not really that big a problem. But we need to figure out how to make that work across the domains. So that's where we are with it. Once we figure this out, then we'll be able to create new GCP projects in this new domain, and we'll be able to invite people to have the exact same level of authority over the testing resources that Googlers do today.
Okay, so I think what I heard is substantively CNCF will be paying for some portion of these GCP projects, but we don't know which ones yet.
CNCF will be paying, in the ideal state, barring something unforeseen, CNCF will be paying for all of it. Whether it's paying through credits that Google gave it or some other mechanism is to be decided, but it will be paying for it, and it will be run under a domain that is administered by CNCF. In fact, I do not hold the keys to that domain. It is only Linux Foundation System Administration that holds the keys to that domain. That is the goal in sort of the disentanglement of Google from Kubernetes infrastructure. People give us a hard time. Well, we're working on it.
Totally. This is something I'm like massively in favor of, and I think I was probably the reason you've dropped in here. It's just because I saw a slide that had SIG Testing's name on it, and it was the first time I had ever heard of it, so I just wanted to clear up that we were in the loop. The other thing I have concerns over is just like test infra can mean a lot of things, or Kubernetes infrastructure can mean a lot of things, and so I feel like at some point we ought to spell out what that things is. Like off the top of my head, I saw the slide mention Jenkins, but we're probably also talking about Munge GitHub and all of the submit queue instances. We're probably talking about Prow. We're probably talking about all the clusters that we spin up for E2E tests. We may be talking about all of the various buckets that we store test artifacts in. We may be talking about the infrastructure we use to actually build and cut the releases, that sort of stuff. I would like to see us spell out where that line falls and what the schedule is.
That's great. We absolutely will have to charter that. But off the top of my head, the line falls on anything that is part of the Kubernetes project that is important to the successful running of the project that isn't tied to any one particular provider. So it doesn't seem appropriate that we would run Google-specific tests. It doesn't seem appropriate that we would run Google's GKE testing, or that we would block on Google's GKE testing. But it does seem appropriate that the submit queue and the Munge GitHub bots and the website and the docs and everything else falls under this umbrella. So the first thing I want to move is like DNS for Kubernetes.io and Kates.io.
Yeah, I think I'm largely on board there. And so what's the right forum to track this stuff going forward?
That's a great question. I actually don't have any idea. I hadn't thought about what SIG should own this, but it probably should be under SIG something. I don't know the answer to that. I'm open to suggestions. Right now, it's going nowhere until we sort out who's paying for stuff, right? So it's really just in a holding pattern until we get that sorted out. I was on vacation the last couple of weeks, so I'm back now, and I hope to push it forward. Now that we have a domain, so there's actually a small bill going to Linux Foundation every month, I'd like for it to be worthwhile.
Yeah, I think most of the resources you mentioned are under SIG testing currently. I guess that would make sense. So some of the infrastructure would be pretty easy to move, like Munger and such. But the other stuff, like the projects for all the CI testing, that might be a little bit more difficult. We are changing some of how that's set up currently, so that could make it easier. Does CNCF have employees directly, or is it a conglomerate that multiple organizations are part of?
It has at least an executive director and whatever Chris Anishek's job is. So that, yes, it has a couple of employees for sure, but it really is part of the larger Linux Foundation umbrella. They have employees and they have sysadmins. Their sysadmins are not going to run our stuff, right? That's going to be on us, but they're willing to help us get things set up in a way that's compatible. So yes, there's going to be work involved in adapting the test projects and finding ways that we can move the non-Google specific parts away from the Google specific parts. We have our utility cluster, Ryan, like I know you have access to that. We'll have to move that over there. We'll have to move reviewable.kubernetes.io over to the new domain. We'll move DNS, we'll move the Kates.io, SSL forwarder, all those little bits and pieces. The Munge GitHub is another great example. We'll have to move those over, and then the larger pieces are going to be more challenging, right? But it does give us an opportunity to rethink how we named projects and how we have sharded the work, right? Like today, we have projects that are just sort of dumping grounds for, I don't know, throw it in this project. And like we can stop to rethink that now.
We do have work in progress to make projects something that's least for each test instead of having a project for every EDE test flavor, which would also help a lot.
Okay.
I don't know how close that. So rather than having the 300 different projects for every EDE variant, we'll just have like 20, and you will get one for your test, and it will be less crazy.
Yeah, when you were calculating the cost, what projects did you include? All of our EDE projects, or were you looking at like the main ones that run our pre-submit tests and like the Jenkins and Prowl?
I looked at the scale tests, and I looked at some of the E2E tests, and I looked at the just the utility cluster test.
So I kind of want to give time for the other topics here, but
yeah.
What I'm hearing as a concrete action item is we should probably follow up in this forum. I know the CNCF board meeting is happening at the end of this week, where we might get some substantive decisions on what exactly they're willing to pay for. And I can ping you offline to sort of bring the discussion back here. I think like the high level question would be whether or not this would happen in the V1.8 timeframe, or when we could do it to be as non-disruptive as possible.
Yeah, I mean, there's no rush for this, I think, right? I mean, it's been sitting this way for a couple of years. There's no urgency to it, but if we don't sort of keep pushing on it, it'll never get done. So from my point of view, I think the action item that I have is to figure out how is this going to be chartered under the new governance stuff. I expect probably what we'll end up with is a working group here. It's like this admin working group, and we'll get a couple of volunteers who will hold the keys to the kingdom, and then the rest will be delegated to SIG Testing to do the testing work.
That sounds awesome. And if we need to have a face-to-face discussion and a working group isn't spun up in time, this seems like the right SIG by default.
All right, cool. Well, if anybody has any other questions, right now I'm the point of contact. All right, I'm going to drop off then. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Tim. Okay, with that, I want to hand off to Ryan and Eric, and I think I see somebody else in the room there. I can't tell. Hey, is that Cole?
Yes, that's me.
Sweet. You guys have been doing a lot of really awesome work on Munch GitHub. I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about that today.
Yeah. Do you have any specific questions, or do you just want me to talk about what I've been working on recently?
Well, so just in general, like, I think there's a lot of stuff that's worth bragging about, but I'm not sure I'm going to hit everything. The stuff that I've been seeing has mostly been geared at making Munch GitHub a lot more operationally friendly. But I sometimes harp in the community or to other people about the fact that Munch GitHub takes a long time to redeploy right now. I think you've done some things to address that.
Yeah. We have talked about doing the GitHub proxy, right?
Yeah, I don't know if you mentioned it here. We have some vague plans for having a stateful GitHub caching proxy where it receives events from GitHub, and when you make a GitHub API request to it, and it will synthesize the appropriate thing based on its understanding of the world. So any sort of GitHub, anything you write that touches a GitHub API could hit that instead and not waste API tokens. So in theory, you could have the Munger startup and do a really fast scan of everything because we have a local state cache. And that also gives more flexibility for all sorts of other things. Right now, the Munger has a lot of hacks where it tries to do e-tags and stuff, so it doesn't waste tokens, but it still takes like the exact same amount of time to do a request and everything. But that would be a good way to get the state into a separate thing and let more of our stuff be stateless. But that's not started just yet. That's one idea.
Okay. I mean, I guess like from a high level, I've even seen it discussed on some pull requests, and I have it in my brain at least, that Munch GitHub is something we would rather move away from in favor of things like Prow and Prow plugins. But at the same time, it is the submit queue that we have today. And so I think a lot of effort has gone into making it more operationally friendly today. I guess my question is, do we know where sort of we stand with long-term plans for this? Are we really truly end of lifing this and making a concerted effort, or are we trying to actually like finally get rid of some of the cruft and push it forward?
I think we're moving the truly stateless bits, like the truly stateless bits out that we can, like a lot of the label management where someone responds and the label is updated. That can be moved to an event-based thing like Prow, and that is being done. The core queue itself is probably the most valuable and useful and complex bit of code there. Well, we're not currently looking at replacing that. There are some ideas where we could have all the queue state be labels on a repo, but that's for our future. Right now we're looking at, we're doing work to make it so you could have one submit queue handle multiple repos, and that you can do better reloads. So Cole has just been implementing one where you can change your config map with all the options, and it will pick those options up without restarting the queue. You can change a blocking job spec, and there's no downtime, for example.
Yeah, I'm going to deploy that today.
Then you've also been, you want to talk about the submit queues you've added?
Oh yeah, so there's now a submit queue for the cops repo. That's up and running, and we're working on making a new one for the community repo.
The goal here being that every Kubernetes repo has a submit queue running with the exact same features. There's less confusion where, oh, this is one of the side repos where you have to manually merge. That trips people up a lot. So we just want the same workflow for everything that we do, and especially as people are adding more repos for like second or third tier components that will get integrated later. It's just much better to have the same experience for everyone.
Oh, totally agree. I've noticed a lot of the work has been done in favor of like making it easy to deploy all the queues at once or better templatize things. Is the actual like resource cost or overhead of running an instance of Munch GitHub per repo something worth worrying about, or do we think like it's mostly been operations costs that we're now templating away? Because that's usually one of the big hangups I've seen or I have pushed forward when people are like, why don't we have this awesome automation on this particular repo? I try and say, well, Prow can be turned on for every repo in the entire organization. Could the functionality you require be implemented as a Prow event? Also, it's really painful, and there's a lot of overhead and administrivia to stand up yet another instance of Munge GitHub. But it seems like that cost has been going down over time. Is this something we want to encourage people to use across more repos?
Yeah, so currently we've been trying to make the cost of deploying the next marginal instance not as much as it is now. I think our end game plan is to make it so that a single instance can operate on multiple repos, but given that none of the mungers were designed to do that, I think that's a little ways out. So we're also looking at, there's also been a little bit of work done to deploy Munge GitHub with Helm charts. So that'll make it a lot easier to deploy a lot of instances, especially if there's shared config between them.
Yeah, there's a lot less copy pasting of files you have to do now to deploy a new version or a new instance, and a lot of the driving force behind the multiple repos under one submit queue is not because there are so many resources for each submit queue. Each submit queue uses resources approximately according to how many events the GitHub repo has. It's more about doing interesting features across multiple repos, like lockstep integrations between different branches. If we did do something like that, it would obviously be advantageous to have one queue that understood that, oh, I have these PRs across these two repos that need to merge at the same time. And that's very difficult to do, obviously, if you don't have one central queue that knows about both of them.
If we had a caching GitHub proxy, that would that extrapolates a lot of the common like load, I guess, across a lot of the repos. So that would also help.
That's super cool. I mean, for me personally, at least, the main reason I just wanted to see you guys on camera is because I think you've been doing awesome work, and I wanted to thank you a lot for it, because that code has been through so many hands, and it's just kind of been tossed around like a hot potato, and it's good to see some like actual decent engineering practices getting applied to it.
Yeah, reviewing Cole's 5,000 line PRs has been very exclusive.
I really have been trying. It kind of bums me out that all I can contribute are like your comments aren't quite right, because you guys have done a fantastic job of catching all the other really detailed stuff. I think your points about multi-repo stuff, if Maru is on here, I think he had a couple questions about that maybe would be appropriate to raise now.
I think my concerns around multi-repo are less about the CI behind it and more about, I mean, it's related, but kind of tangential. My concern is just as people start moving stuff into separate repos, there seems to be an emphasis on relying on the existing testing infrastructure. And I don't see anybody saying, we really need to make sure there's good interfaces between the stuff across these repos, and those interfaces are well tested. And my sort of alarmist concern, having seen this play out in OpenStack not well, is that sort of path leads towards things depending on implicit behavior rather than documented behavior. And it ends up being that you have to test everything with everything else all the time. And so you end up with something that's very sort of unwieldy from a CI/CD perspective. The amount of resources required to keep it going just is an ever-increasing exponential thing. And the other challenge is Prow is intended to solve a simpler problem. And the idea that it's going to evolve to solve this more complicated problem puts it on a path towards Zool. And so my concern would also be, you know, if we're going to move to this multi-repo world with all those implications, I think it's either, I think it would be helpful to either review some of the decisions that Zool has made, not necessarily using Zool directly, but at least consider the fact that they've actually solved a lot of these problems already, and us reinventing the wheel, I don't think would serve anyone well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I have read through a lot of the Zool presentations and papers and such, and we don't currently have any of the same processes with handles the multi-branch and multi-repo integrations in a pipeline and everything like that. I think we're going to try avoiding going down that sort of complexity as much as possible. I don't think we currently have anything quite like that. And we do also have some members working on much better integration testing where components could be tested at a smaller level. Quinton Lee has a proposal for essentially doing an entire API server controller and kubelet deployment on under one Docker image with any components you want to change in there, changed as necessary. So we could change a lot of the EDE tests to be actually an integration test running locally, and that sort of downscaling would really help these component repos get a better testing of their module and such like that. So yeah, we're definitely interested in Zool and what it has to offer for multi-repo if we go down that path, but I don't think there's not really a consensus yet on how we're going to do it. Obviously, if we have multi-repo and then everything's lockstep with Kubernetes, you get no benefit. So that's a silly route that we won't take, but other than that, I'm not sure what devs have decided just yet. The current state of the world is we do publish some side repos from Kubernetes SIG, and that's about. And there's a couple other ones that we render in, like I think C Advisor is one of the few ones that gets included as an image. But yeah, we don't have a good story for multi-repo testing currently.
I mean, we don't really have multi-repo properly yet, so it's kind of chicken or egg type of thing. But like I said, I think that if the dev side of things doesn't focus on ensuring interface stability, I worry that CI/CD is going to have to is going to be left holding the bag and have to go down the road of testing everything with everything and all the complexity, Zool-like complexity that implies. I really hope that we can avoid that. But like I said, I don't really see a lot of evidence that people on the dev side really understand what I'm talking about because maybe they haven't experienced it firsthand. It's kind of, it's nebulous until you see it, and then it's just terrible. So
I kind of think I'd like to follow up with you offline because this may be related to a discussion I tried to bring up during SIG architecture, where I feel like we need to do the project as a whole needs to do a better job of sort of defining what the version boundaries are supposed to be between all the different layers and components as we move into this multi-repo world. I guess for the purposes of this meeting today, do you have any like concrete multi-repo examples that are particularly concerning to you? I sort of get like in an impending, everybody's trying to split into multiple repos kind of thing, but I'm not sure who's going to get there first and who's going to trip up into these issues that you're trying to raise. Like I know kubectl is making a real concerted effort, but I'm not sure where they're aiming roadmap wise. I just haven't had the time to look.
I think that the pioneer in this space is like Client Go and API Machinery. And there's a document, let's see if I can quickly find it.
I feel like at least partially they've punted a little bit to us to improve how we stage code out of those repos as well, right? Like,
they're delegating the repo publishing.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the concerns that I've raised, both in the document I've linked in chat and in the Leadership Summit, is that I think it's kind of dangerous to be moving towards a multi-repo world without actually starting with interface stability within one repo. Because it's something you can easily achieve, right? You can write the tests, you can make sure they're running, and then you can move things apart and the tests will continue running. But if you move things apart and then try to institute that interface stability, it's a lot harder because then you have to make changes in two places where you have any sort of difference of opinion.
I have a slight degree of apathy towards this because like we don't have control over who's going to do what because the SIGs are doing them independently, right? And this particular SIG is responsible for then doing the integration testing across them, but they have been moving independently without sort of a set of checks and balances that existed at a higher level to ensure that we are doing the right thing first and that other people agree with it, right? I've been adamantly opposed to the idea of moving out API machinery in the API client first. I thought that was a bad example, but there needs to be some lockstep driven process across SIGs to coordinate this effort, right? So like, I don't see how there needs to be some working group that makes this happen, right? Because it's not just SIG testing. It has to be a focused group of people who are making this go, right? And we have other working groups in other areas that cross SIG boundaries for things like this, but I have not seen a working group related to making sure that our infrastructure is sane as we migrate.
I'd agree with that. I mean, I was bringing it up in the context of like, I just wasn't sure how many people in SIG testing were sort of aware of the implications of the move to multi-repo. And so I'm not suggesting we should solve it, but I think there's people here that would want to participate.
I'm thoroughly paranoid, if that helps, to the degree where I'm, yeah, Aaron's got a thumbs up, other people are nodding. So yeah, I'm thoroughly paranoid of this going forwards, but there isn't a working group that I'm aware of. So.
Yeah, we have so little module level testing. And each module writes their tests as, okay, we have a scheduler. Let's start up a Kubernetes cluster and then do some scheduling operations on it and see if it works. That's not at all something we could set up an interface and test it well with, because all of our testing has been written to assume full integration points. So yeah, there's a lot of refactoring we should do to get a lot of this stuff out. And I'm also very worried about the amplification effect, where if you have too many repos and you want to make a change, you have to make 4 different PRs and shepherd them all. And we either need some way for that shepherding to be joined together and easy, or some. I think we're losing our. No, we're fine. Right?
Well, actually, I was going to say, I think that's maybe a good place to call it for this week. I know we didn't quite get to Tim's point about, can we actually maybe next week talk about how do we test the actual binaries that are cut by Onago under release testing? And there's a pull request I want to get some eyes on, but I'll ping people in Slack about that. Cool. Well, thanks everybody for an awesome Tuesday. We'll see you all next week.
Yep.